welcome the distinguished delegation of China, in particular the head of delegation, His Excellency Mr. Chen Qiu, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of China to the United Nations and other international organizations in Switzerland, who will deliver the opening statement, as well as the distinguished members of the delegation of China, which consists of members from the Chinese central government, Hong Kong Special Administration Region, and the Macau Special Administrative Region. Of course, I'm not going to read the full list of the delegation, otherwise I'm not going to finish before this afternoon. I would also welcome all those observing the dialogue in the room or via webcast. Before giving the floor to the delegation for consideration of the third periodic report of China, of which the reports of Hong Kong, China, and Macau, China, I would like to outline the methodology we will follow for the dialogue today. I would like to outline the methodology we will follow for the dialogue today and tomorrow. We have prepared a sheet with the proposed speaking times for the dialogue, which will be conducted following the 4 clusters and led by the committee members constituting the task force for this review. The initial questions will be posed by the country rapporteur and lead member of that cluster, Mr. Windfur. Other members may pose follow-up questions afterwards. Other members of the task force are Mr. Hennebel, Cluster 2, Mr. Kunei, Cluster 3, and Ms. Saran, Cluster 4. The delegation is kindly requested to speak at reasonable pace and to provide any written material that will be read out by the delegation to the Secretariat. To facilitate this process and enable us to cover the full range of issues at hand, I would like to invite my colleagues and the distinguished members of the delegation to speak in a concise manner, giving due attention to the time allocations. With this, I have the pleasure to give you the floor, Your Excellency, to deliver the opening statement. And the delegation has 10 minutes on that. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Chinese government, I'm greatly honored to present China's third periodic report on the implementation of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. The Chinese government, my statement has been presented to the Secretariat, so I'll be brief. Since its last review, China steadfastly followed the Chinese path of human rights development and made historic progress in promoting its human rights cause, scoring new achievements in protecting Chinese people's economic, social, and cultural rights. Firstly, we made constant efforts to optimize the overall planning of the promotion and protection of those rights. Since the last review, China formulated and enacted new laws, including the Civil Code and Anti-Domestic Violence Law, revised Population and Family Planning Law, and the Education Law. We also repealed regulations on re-education through labor. China has also issued dozens of policy papers covering specific areas of economic, social, and cultural rights, including on development-driven poverty alleviation in rural areas. Secondly, the right to subsistence and the right to development have been upheld as the foremost basic human rights. In the past decade, China's GDP rose from 54 trillion yuan to 121 yuan, propelling it to the world's second largest economy and contributing by around 36% to the world economic growth. At the average exchange rate, China's per capita GDP has exceeded 12,000 US dollars for 2 consecutive years. China has won the biggest battle against poverty in human history as scheduled, ending poverty for nearly 1 billion for 98.99 million rural residents living below the current poverty line, meeting poverty eradication goal of the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development 10 years ahead of schedule, and contributing by over 70% to the world's achievement in poverty reduction. China has also witnessed bumper harvest in grain production. Third, China has implemented a people-centered development strategy and secured and improved people's living well-being in the process. China has made extensive efforts under an employment-first approach. In the past decade, China's employment population in urban areas has increased from 370 million to 480 million, with annual growth rate of 30 million, and kept the current unemployment figure in cities at 5.6%. As a major country with a huge population, China has overcome the impact of pandemic and the downward pressure in economy and achieved a relatively full employment. Since the last review, China has built more than 59 million units of affordable housing and housing in rundown urban areas, and rebuilt over 24 million dilapidated rural houses. China has put in place the biggest social security system in the world. In the past decade, people covered by the basic old age insurance increased from 790 million to 1.04 billion. Those covered by the unemployment insurance schemes increased from 150 million to 230 million, and those under the coverage of work-related insurance are up from 190 million to 290 million. In the past decade, China's people's average life expectancy has increased from 74.8 years to 78.2 years, and the Chinese people's main health indicators rank high among the middle and high-income countries. China has put in place the largest network of national basic health medical insurance, covering over 1.36 billion people. The Chinese government has also steadily increased investment in medical resources at the community level, especially in remote areas, making it possible for 90% of the families in urban and rural areas to reach the nearest hospital within 15 minutes. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Chinese government has put the people and their lives first and managed to maintain the lowest rates of severe cases and case fatality in the world. China has recently refined its COVID response measures in light of the evolving situation and the increase in vaccination rates and containment experience, and experienced some short-term infection shock, which is now petering out. Fifthly, guided by the belief that pristine waters and lush mountains are invaluable assets, we brought significant improvements to China's ecological environment. In the past decade, the average PM2.5 concentration in cities dropped by 34.8%. The carbon dioxide emission per unit of GDP decreased by 34.4% nationwide. And the share of coal in the total energy consumption was down from 68.5% to 56%. China has also announced that it will strive to peak carbon dioxide emission by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. Sixthly, we have actively protected the right to education and cultural rights. In a historic achievement in the field of universal education, compulsory education is now fully free in both urban and rural areas, and moves are also underway to deliver on universal higher education. A modern system of public cultural services is gradually taking shape. In the past decade, the added value of China's cultural industry increased from 1.8 trillion yuan to 4.5 trillion yuan at an annual average rate of increase of 12.1%. Cultural market entities have increased from 36,000 to 56,000. Libraries and cultural pavilions have increased from 6,300 to 95,000. Grassroots cultural organizations have also risen by 50% to 450,000. Seventh, We have further enhanced protection of the rights and interests of vulnerable groups. All 56 ethnic groups in China are equal, and the lawful rights and interests of ethnic minorities are effectively protected. China has also adopted consecutively 7 outlines for women's development and outlines for children's development, amended the law on the protection of women's rights and interests as part of our efforts to promote gender equality and the all-round development of women and children. China is therefore recognized by the WHO as one of the 10 fast-track countries in women's and children's health. By the end of 2020, the average life expectancy of women in China has reached 80.88 years. 85 million persons with disabilities in China are also fully supported in their rehabilitation, education, unemployment, and intellectual and cultural needs. And more than 95% of children with disabilities are enrolled in compulsory education system. With the ratification of the Marrakesh Treaty, the rights to appreciate literature and receive education of China and people with reading disorders have been effectively protected. China is moving proactively to deal with the problem of aging population by investing heavily in the 15-minute circle of elderly care services. Eighth, we have actively promoted international cooperation in the field of economic, social, and cultural rights. China has provided development aid to 166 countries and international organizations and dispatched more than 600,000 personnel. The China UN Peace and Development Trust Fund successfully launched 34 development projects. The Belt and Road Initiative and the Global Development Initiative put forward by China are warmly received and widely supported by the international community as active contribution to the promotion and protection of human rights in the world. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, no one can claim a perfect record in human rights protection, as there is always room for improvement. China still faces multiple problems and challenges in promoting those rights, including a glaringly unbalanced and inadequate development, multiple bottlenecks in high-quality development, wide disparities in income distribution, as well as the level of development between urban and rural areas and among different regions, not to mention daunting challenges in ecological conservation. The 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China has set out China's central task for the near future, emphasizing the advancement of the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation on all fronts through a Chinese path to modernization. The process of Chinese modernization is also a process of constantly promoting and protecting human rights, and China will strive relentlessly to realize equal enjoyment of all human rights by its people at higher level. Now I'd like to give the floor to the 2 deputies of my delegation, Ms. Fu Su-wei Gracie from the Hong Kong SAR and Mr. Lo So-choi from Macau SAR to present the implementation of the covenant in Hong Kong and Macau respectively. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China since 1997. We have been implementing one country, two systems policy, which has proven to be the best institutional arrangement to ensure Hong Kong's long-term prosperity and stability and to serve the fundamental interests of our nation. Despite past turbulence in our society, Hong Kong is back to the right track of one country, two systems, with the double safeguards of the implementation of the Hong Kong National Security Law and the improved electoral system. People return to their day-to-day life in peace and stability resumed. Hong Kong people can continue to enjoy the legitimate rights and freedoms guaranteed under the Constitution of the PRC, the Basic Law of the Hong Kong SAR, and the relevant provisions of the international covenants as applied to Hong Kong. And with stability comes prosperity. Hong Kong remains a global fundraising platform, raising over $13 billion through initial public offering in 2022. Our financial market remains thriving. In the Global Financial Center Index published last year, the status of Hong Kong as a global financial center has been reaffirmed. The government also attaches great importance to improving people's livelihood. On the labor front, we are committed to promoting employment, upholding workers' rights to join and form trade unions, improving employees' benefits, and protecting employment rights and benefits of foreign domestic helpers. Besides, we initiated a study on the enhancement of the review mechanism of the statutory minimum wage. Under our non-contributory social security system, we have significantly improved cash assistance in recent years to assist those in need. Addressing housing needs tops our agenda. We have adopted a series of strategies to increase public housing supply by enhancing quantity, speed, efficiency, and quality, thereby shortening the waiting time for public rental housing. Against the background of an aging population and the increasing prevalence of chronic diseases, we have been making progress in various areas, including promoting primary health care, improving public hospital services, increasing healthcare manpower, and enhancing mental health. The West Kowloon Cultural Center has become a new cultural landmark, earning worldwide acclaim. We are committed to nurturing diversified talent, fostering the arts and creative industries in order to develop Hong Kong into an East-West center for international cultural exchange. Leveraging on the motherland's strong support for Hong Kong in the National 14 Five-Year Plan, the development of Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area, and the Belt and Road Initiative, the Hong Kong SAR government is working at full steam to seize these opportunities and to forge ahead under the successful one country, two system policy. Thank you.
Distinguished chairperson and members of the committee, on behalf of the Macau SAR government of the People's Republic of China, as a member of the Chinese government delegation, I'm honored to join my colleagues from mainland China and Hong Kong SAR in the committee's consideration of the third periodical report on China's implementation of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Since the consideration in 2014, the Macau SAR government has carefully examined the committee's recommendations and actively followed up, and with the substantial support of the central government and joint efforts of all sectors of society, considerable results have been achieved. Let me briefly introduce the main progress made by Macau SAR in its implementation of the covenant in terms of legal system development and policy measures. In order to promote the protection of human rights, especially the rights and interests of vulnerable groups, the Macau SAR has taken multiple important measures in the development of legal system, including in the area of women's rights and interests. The law on preventing and combating domestic violence was enacted in 2016, and the Criminal Code was amended in 2017 to make sexual harassment an independent crime so as to strengthen the protection of women. In terms of the rights and interests of the elderly, the legal system for protection of rights and interests of elderly was adopted in 2018, setting out the general framework. With regard to the rights and interests of persons with disabilities, the tax incentives for employment of persons with disability and working income subsidy scheme were introduced in 2018 and 2020. In addition, the legislation on public housing expressly specifies the families of persons with disabilities are given priority. In terms of the protection of employees' rights and interests, the law on minimum wage was adopted in 2020, and labor relations law was amended to increase the number of days of maternity leave. The trade union bill was submitted to Legislative Assembly in 2022. Concerning education, the special education system was formulated in 2020 to promote inclusive education. As regards the promotion of environmental protection, a series of laws and regulations have been adopted, such as the construction waste management system and restriction on supply of plastic bags. Through the above measures, the quality of life of Macau SAR residents have significantly improved. We look forward to an in-depth exchange of views with the committee in the upcoming sessions to help the members better understand the Macau SAR's implementation of the provisions of Covenant. Thank you.
I thank the head of delegation of China for his statement. I thank the two representatives who spoke after him as well. As a reminder, colleagues, China ratified the Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights in October 1997. The committee reviewed China's first report in April 2005. Then, Review of the report after was in May 2014. The report we have now is the third periodic report of China. Now we started a dialogue between committee members and the esteemed delegation on that report. I give the floor first to Mr. Michael Windfour to pose the questions under Cluster 1 of the Covenant, which is Articles 1 to 5. Mr. Windfour, you have the floor. 15 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Excellence, and I would heartily welcome the whole large delegation from China with representatives from different ministries and the special administrative regions of Hong Kong and Macau. I will be the country rapporteur. Thanks for delivering the third periodic report to us. Thanks also for your answers to our list of issues and all the additional information you have provided in the annexes. I will cover Cluster 1, as our chair has said, Articles 1 to 5, and we'll have some overarching issues in the introduction. First, dealing with China in 6 hours devoted for a state review is a challenge for the committee. We have the same time allocated for the state reviews as for all other countries, namely 1 time slot today for Cluster 1 and 2 and 1 time slot tomorrow for Cluster 3 and 4. This poses serious challenges, as in the short time frame, we will have to focus on the People's Republic of China, the Macau Special Administrative Region, and the Hong Kong Specialized Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China. The committee will therefore prioritize the most pressing human rights issues under the covenant which we see at the moment. The committee would like to emphasize that we have carefully considered all written inputs received. This includes, but is not limited to, inputs from the state party, such as the reply to our list of issues and, of course, the report, as well as inputs from civil society. This is a standard practice which the committee always follows in state reviews. We would like to emphasize that the committee seeks a constructive dialogue with the state party. Apart from the government's own report, as it is always crucial to include civil society inputs as for independent sources of information in order to determine whether the covenant is de facto being applied and to assess how the implementation and enforcement can be improved to allow for the full enjoyment of covenant rights. We would also like to underline that the committee has received an unprecedented amount of submissions by civil society. The magnitude of submissions points on the one side to the importance and relevance of your country, while at the same time it indicates that there are concerns, significant concerns relating to human rights situation in China, Hong Kong and Macau. The committee methodology for the dialogue follows the methodology of all dialogues. Rather than a detailed presentation of the progress you have made, and you made it in your opening statement, Ambassador, the committee will focus on areas where we see space and need for improvement, which you mentioned also at the end of your own statement. The committee, of course, recognized progress also partially in the concluding observations, but not today. We don't have the time for all this, such as in the case of the state party and remarkable reduction in poverty, for example. But now we will focus on the questions concerning implementation needs. Apart from submissions addressed human rights obligations within the territory of the state party, the committee has received also submissions addressing China's extraterritorial obligation, particularly related to the impact of the Belt and Road Initiative in many other countries, with large infrastructure projects and corporate relations to affected workers, local communities, and we will address the issue as well. Let me come to issues of general concern, and I will start with space for civil society actors to express their views and participate in the delivery, as well as for lawyers and human rights defenders to act freely. We appreciate that the state party expressed respect for labor and human rights activists in the state party report. Despite that respect, we have received ample information from civil society organizations that human rights defenders are operating in a not easy or deteriorating environment. According to the information received, human rights defenders experience significant difficulties in accessing a qualified lawyer of their choice. They are often quite being intimidated because of their human rights work, sometimes imprisoned. We heard that the right to health can also become a concern for human rights defenders who are partially being denied medical care in detention or can suffer from trauma due to detention conditions. So my questions related to this are information correct that human rights defenders who are members of ethnic minorities, particularly Mongolians, Tibetans, Uyghurs, are disproportionately affected by investigation, arbitrary detention, and unlawful imprisonment when promoting the rights enshrined in the covenant? Can you report about cases and statistics of persons affected? The State Party stated in their third periodic review and in their response to the list of issues that there is no intimidation of lawyers and that punitive measures are limited to administrative sanctions. Contrary to these claims, the committee has received information from multiple sources, including NGOs, human rights defenders, lawyers, UN agencies, that lawyers experience de facto intimidation, which deter as well as severely restrict the ability to take up cases related to economic, social, cultural rights due to fear of reprisal. The committee has, for example, received information on the increasing inability of human rights lawyers to practice law with specific regards to economic, social, cultural rights. Our information sources indicate that they have also difficulties. Sometimes human rights lawyers were placed into residential surveillance at a designated location. We acknowledge the information provided to the committee by the government in your reply of the list of issues. The State Party has drafted provisions on legally protecting lawyers' practicing rights. On the other hand, the committee is concerned about the number that might be sufficient to impede the ability of lawyers and detend cases related to rights enshrined in the covenant. We are a bit concerned that the current legal climate might have a chilling effect on human rights defenders and civil society. Question related to this is, what is the government planning in order to allow for more public participation in policy processes? How are you trying to address the reported limitation on spaces for civil society and the amount of intimidation and harassment also to lawyers and human rights defenders? For the realization of economic, social, and cultural rights, it is essential to apply the human rights principles of transparency and participation. They are not only human rights obligations in itself, they are also allowed to develop policies that are more effective because potentially affected persons know very well that they are potentially negatively impacted, and planning or planned policy and investments can be better try to avoid these impacts. If heard early in the policy formulation processes, the selection of better policy alternatives might be more likely. How do you discuss internally to give the principles of transparency and participation a larger space in the implementation of your development plans, particularly related to economic, social, and cultural human rights? I want also to mention briefly that apparently to Hong Kong, we have received information from criticism of civil society organizations that that they are often endangering national security, including trade union activities. Trade union representatives report about problems in registered trade unions any longer and work freely. We received information about the number of those detained under the national security law. We also received information of those who said the national security law were positive, just to flag this. Regarding Hong Kong, the committee has received information that after the enactment of the national security law, the civil society landscape of Hong Kong has changed since the last review. They are threatened in public media, partially funding cuts for artists can happen. The national security law that is reported to us is worsening long-standing problems of discrimination against minorities and marginalized groups, LGBTI people, non-refoulement protection, migrant domestic workers. So my question in this regard is, what are the numbers of organizations classified of endangered national security since the enactment of the NSL? Is it correct that for almost all arrested under the NSL, passports were confiscated, be it journalists, academics, staff of humanitarian aid organizations? How does the State Party and the Hong Kong government secures that the national security legislation is not used as a pretext to suppress the civil society and severely undermines individual fulfillment of economic, social, and cultural rights, such as, for example, the problems of the largest trade union, which has been stopped, and encroachment of academic freedoms and schools, which has been reported to us? The definition of what is national security related might be expanded, as it is not in the hand of it's in the hand of the Committee of National Security. How does the state party and the Hong Kong government wants to guarantee that there is reliable application of that law and not arbitrary affecting the potential work of civil society organizations? In that respect, let me end this point. While the committee welcomes the contributions of civil society, and we have received different opinions, as I mentioned also to you, I also regret to learn that within China, Hong Kong and Macau, human rights defenders, NGOs and CSO, according to information we have received, might face difficulties in attending this review in person or report because they are in fear of reprisals. So the committee is also concerned about the fact that many of the NGO reported to the committee or to other UN treaty bodies are forced to work from exile. So we want to ask you to carefully make sure that no persons or institutions that have sent us information or observations should face retaliation at the end of the dialogue. One question concerning the COVID-19 pandemic. Given the impact China had on the spread of the virus globally, and its impact is still actually it has, how will the state party improve the transparency concerning the sharing of basic data with the international community, and how you plan to improve the international cooperation in combating the pandemic? My next issue is on national human rights institution. The committee takes note that the States Party claims that the National People's Congress and its standing committees ensure the implementation of legal provisions of civil society based. However, the committee would like to emphasize that in light of the Paris Principles, national human rights institutions are independent institutions, and therefore we would like to ask you, what are your plans to establish an independent national human rights institution which can have a huge potential to help to protect, promote, and to better human rights implementation? Is the state willing to seek the support and advice on the UN, especially the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in that process? And the same question can go to Hong Kong and the special administrative region of Macau. Concerning climate change, you have mentioned the progress you have achieved concerning CO2 units per GDP. Still, you are currently not meeting the Paris Agreement emission targets, which are also relevant for Hong Kong and Macau. Well, your president has publicly announced that China will support internationally other countries in a green development path, and that no more coal power plants should be supported in other countries. The actual practice seems to be different according to the information we have received. Therefore, my question would be, what additional measures are needed for the state party to achieve the Paris Agreement emission targets? How fast will the green development pathway be fully implemented? How many coal power stations are currently financed by China abroad? Last question on these special issues is, you have made reservation when you ratified our covenant relating to Article 8.1 of the covenant, and do you consider to withdraw the ratification on Article 8.1, and also do you think or plan to ratify our optional protocol to the covenant? My next will relate to business and human rights, and there I have three questions. One is related, we have seen your information on how your guidelines for the compliance management of enterprises has been developed. We are asking you, how far are these guidelines for overseas reflect the standards of human rights due diligence, which has been developed with the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights? We have also the plan to ask you if you plan to have a binding human rights due diligence legislation for obligations on foreign companies operating in China and companies acting in China and abroad in line with the UNGP. Reiterating the committee's question, the list of issues, please indicate how victims of human rights abuses affected by companies, Chinese business, often state-owned, can address and access effective remedies and complaint mechanism. Please provide examples on this. The second is extraterritorial obligation. So what kind of binding regulation does China have to ensure that state-owned enterprises do not contribute to undermining human rights of people in other countries? Does China assess the environmental, social, and human rights impact of overseas projects and is so far to mitigate the risk identified or to prevent the harm. This is also relevant for projects financed by the AIIB, but particularly also through the Belt and Road Initiative. And the last question I have on this international dimension is the debt sustainability related to Chinese investments linked to the Belt and Road Initiative. On the issue of debt, how does the debt sustainability framework address public debt that was accrued to the Belt and Road Initiative participating countries to Chinese state bank loans before 2019? And according to the debt service suspension initiative for the poorest countries, what other tools are available or plan to address debt suspension long term? And do you evaluate the relationship between loan of public debt and the impact
Sorry,
of...
Mr. Windford,
Yeah.
it's time to conclude.
Very carefully. No, it's 30
Continue,
minutes now.
please.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Let me come to some issues I would like to raise under the cluster. Additionally, that is the right to freely dispose of natural wealth and resources. I will just ask one question: how many Tibetan nomads has been resettled from their pasture since 2014? Maybe you can give us figures. What type of, let's say, reasonable compensation they have achieved, and how does the state party assures that development and poverty alleviation measures can also conform with the way they live as traditional communities? Concerning non-discrimination, I would like to focus on the following aspects, and I will only mention them because we would like to get some more information. First, the question is, do you plan to develop a general anti-discrimination legislation which would allow to address all forms of discrimination, particularly also maybe on gender? That is also a question which goes to Hong Kong and Macau. Concerning specific discrimination facts, I would like to mention at least the situation of ethnic minorities, including Mongolians, Tibetan, and Uyghurs. So how does the state party secures all forms of ethnic discrimination is overcome that ethnic minorities face in public data trials concerning, let's say, mass evictions, relocations? That would be very interesting for us. I also want to ask on the non-discrimination of rural to urban migration workers. The question is, how does China, Hong Kong and Macau wants to overcome the discrimination of migrant domestic workers? How does the state party wants to address the discrimination linked to the household registration system and to ensure that all rural and urban workers are able to enjoy the work opportunities and all social security, housing and health benefits as other Chinese people will have to focus on? And I want to mention that we have also questions or concerns on the non-discrimination of LGBTI communities. So the question here is the state party is engaged and planning to proactively promote social acceptance of LGBTI people and the diversity of sexual orientation and gender identity? I want to conclude by saying concerning gender equality, we have seen in your reports how much progress you have also achieved, particularly with the change of the civil code, which you've mentioned, the treatment of sexual harassment in China, Hong Kong, but also Macau. Still, we want to ask how the state party wants to combat the declining women relative wages and labor force participation in China. A recent IMF study was saying that the labor market barriers for women have increased over the time, and that gender gap in labor force participation has been increased. So that would be a question we are interested in, is also the political participation of women in political decision-making processes by the Chinese government. So I would have liked to ask much more questions. The time is limited. Thanks for putting so much in it, but we have so much interest in the things which are relevant for your country. Thanks.
Thank you. Now the floor is for the delegation to respond to the questions posed.
I would like to thank Mr. Windford. I would like to thank you for the questions.
Prepare. 5 minutes, as I always say, 300 seconds. Thank you. Colleagues, now we start listening to the replies to the first cluster by the esteemed delegation of the People's Republic of China. Delegation, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank you for the questions. Because of time constraint, I will first give the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs to answer questions concerning national human rights institutions and questions concerning participation of NGO who are not retaliated, and also the ratification of optional protocol of the covenant, and also the One Belt, One Road initiative and its impact and responsibility of companies within and outside China. Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Concerning establishing national human rights institution in accordance with the past principle, as we said, national human rights institutions concern this issue. Different departments in China, according to their mandate, would engage in promoting human rights. There are a few paths. One, the National Congress at different levels and the offices, they would be responsible for dealing with this kind of allegations. The supervision department, they would engage in supervision concerning public officials, and the Ethnic Affairs Commission would be responsible for promoting the rights of ethnic minorities. And Minister of Foreign Affairs is in charge of international cooperation, including review of human rights treaties and UPR. And the Women's Affairs, the trade union, and other organizations, they're in charge of the work related to women, to workers, and people with disabilities. We do note that the international community concerning establishing national human rights institutions in accordance with Paris Principle, we have taken note of the concern, and we will make efforts in this regard. Concerning the Belt and Road Initiative and its impact, since the start of the initiative, indeed, China has signed over 200 initiatives with 150 countries and 30 international organizations involving more than 3,000 cooperation projects. The investment amount concerning 1.2 billion yuan, which has created very good impact on local employment. As to, at the same time, China also values guidance for enterprises outside China, encourage them to engage in environmental protection obligations. In this process, we actively support developing countries in poverty alleviation, food security, combat against the COVID-19, building infrastructure, etc. Our goal is to improve the welfare of the people and to support global sustainable development. Concerning your question on the ratification of the optional protocol of the covenant, China is of the view that compliance of the covenant, the responsibility rests with the government. If the economic, social, and cultural rights of citizens is damaged, then they should resort to domestic measures. China has a lot of laws which have detailed provision concerning economic, social, and cultural rights of citizens, and also provide for how to deal with violations of these rights for citizens. As a result, we have a rather complete legal system which is in line with the covenant. When it comes to review, when it comes to laws and regulations concerning this issue, the relevant rights of citizens are effectively protected, and the spirit of the covenant is well realized. At the same time, we have taken note that in UN, we have the complaint mechanism of the Human Rights Council, which the Chinese government highly values, and the government carefully answers the allegations or related communication from relevant party. So far, China has not acceded to the optional protocol of the covenant. Okay, so far, okay, another question concerning the participation of NGO in the review, which will not be retaliated against. The provision of information, NGOs which participate in providing information in the reviews, they will not be retaliated against. Thank you. Thank you. Now I give the floor. Now concerning questions involving Hong Kong and Macau SAR, I would like to give the floor to the representative of the two regions.
For the questions and comments on the Hong Kong national security.
My question concerning the Basic Law.
SAR are guaranteed at the constitutional level in Chapter 3 of the Basic Law. Article 4 of the Hong Kong National Security Law clearly stipulates that human rights shall be respected and protected in safeguarding national security in the HKSAR. The rights and freedoms which the residents of the HKSAR enjoy under the Basic Law and the provisions of the ICCPR and the ICESCR as applied to Hong Kong shall be protected in accordance with the law. Any measures or enforcement actions taken under the Hong Kong National Security Law must observe the above principle. Many rights and freedoms recognized in the ICCPR are not absolute and may be restricted for reasons of national security and/or public order, etc. This applies to all countries or places, including Hong Kong. Any law enforcement actions taken by Hong Kong law enforcement agencies are based on evidence, strictly according to the law, for the acts of the persons or entities concerned, and have nothing to do with their political stance, background, or occupation. On the comments on trade unions, the HKSAR government reaffirms that the freedom of association is guaranteed under the Basic Law. Article 27 of the Basic Law stipulates that HKSAR residents shall have freedom of association, of assembly, of procession, and of demonstration, and the right and freedom to form and join trade unions and to strike. Article 18 of the Hong Kong Bill of Rights, as set out in the Hong Kong Bill of Rights Ordinance, also guarantees that everyone shall have the right to freedom of association with others, including the right to form and join trade unions for the protection of his interests. One should not speculate about the reasons for decisions of organizations to cease operation or dissolve. We should point out that the implementation of Hong Kong national security law has reverted the chaotic situation and serious violence earlier, and restored stability and increased the confidence in Hong Kong, thereby allowing the city to resume its normal operation and return to the path of development. Whether a particular act constitutes an offense depends on the facts and circumstances of each case, and hence overgeneralization is neither possible nor appropriate. The HKSAR government reiterates that the reporting process on the HKSAR's fourth report in the light of the ICESCR provides a platform to clarify the actual situation in the HKSAR and to engage in constructive dialogue on relevant issues. It should not be overlooked that the HKSAR government proactively consulted the Legislative Council, NGOs, and members of the public in compiling the fourth report, and its implementation of the provisions of the ICESCR as applied to Hong Kong remains open to public examination and scrutiny by individuals and organizations alike. Normal interactions and contacts with other countries, regions, and relevant international organizations will continue to be protected pursuant to the Basic Law and the laws of the HKSAR. On the comment on the definition of endangering NS, offenses endangering national security include those stipulated under the Hong Kong National Security Law and the relevant offenses under Hong Kong laws. For example, sections 9 and 10 of the Crimes Ordinance concerning sedition. Since the implementation of the Hong Kong National Security Law, as regards cases involving suspected acts and activities that endanger national security, as at the 3rd of February 2023, 243 persons were arrested, 149 persons and 5 companies were charged in the cases concerned. We note the other questions related to other areas, but due to the time constraint, we will respond in later sessions. Thank you.
Concerning Basic Law, Article 27, which protects the freedom of speech, according to relevant human rights treaty provisions, NGO in its own capacity can directly provide information or report to the Secretariat. They can attend meetings to give their views and positions. It should be emphasized that the Macau SAR respects relevant institutions and will not stop them, nor does it retaliate against those people who provide information or attend such meetings. Concerning Paris Principle, now in Macau, there are no specific bodies. However, according to relevant provision, the Commission Against the Corruption, this is an independent organ with the power to prosecute against public officials to guarantee that they are protected by law. And also it guarantees that public power is well exercised in accordance with the Paris Principles. The power of the ombudsman, they can suggest the chief executive for regulation or to give explanation concerning regulation or to repeal certain regulation. It can also, according to its power, carry out investigation and provide advice so as to correct unlawful situation or inappropriate situation, including those actions which affect the work.
在此，澳门特区还设有不同的机制。
好，我们下面感谢刚才的回答，因为刚才提了很多的问题，希望我想我们那个回答的时候。
I thank the representatives for your response. Since we are asked lots of questions and we have very limited time, so I hope everyone can answer in a concise manner. Next question related to human rights defenders and lawyers. So I ask the colleagues from Supreme Court to respond to questions. Other departments may add on more information later on. Thank you, Mr. Wang, for your questions. I would like to make a brief introduction based on my knowledge. First of all, you're interested in the health of the inmates. I would like to point out that the right to health of inmates is protected in China. First of all, we have legislation such as the law of prison and other regulations stipulate that all inmates enjoy the right to health. Also, the Human Rights Action Plan also stresses that the detainees are entitled to the protection of the right to health. Based on my knowledge, in prisons, in the detention centers, there were specific medical office and the medical staff. They carry out a periodic health checkup for all the inmates, and everyone has a health file. For those inmates, for those ill inmates, the prison and detention center will provide treatment on time. If necessary, they will be sent to other hospitals and medical facilities for treatment so as to guarantee the right to health and right to life of the inmates. Also, in order to ensure the enforcement of the law, the Procuratorate also has some staff to do supervision in these detention centers and prisons. This is the first question. As for the questions you mentioned, for the people, for the intimidation and reprisal to people who protect the covenant rights, in China, we strictly prohibit any retaliation and reprisal to any person who upholds the covenant rights. In Constitution, we have such provision and related crime. For human rights lawyers, I would like to introduce the following information. In China, we have over 600,000 lawyers. They are the key part of the force to protect the human rights of China, and is a key part of China's efforts to achieve rule of law. I know many lawyers make great contributions to the protection of China's human rights, and they are widely accepted by people. For example, lawyer Tong Lihua, for the past 2 decades, she has made great contributions to protect the rights of rural people. This is just an example out of hundreds of thousands of other lawyers. Most of lawyers practice their work according to the law. Only some individual lawyers violate their professional ethics or the practice discipline or violate the law in China. In such case, these lawyers should be punished by the law. I have a data for you. In between 2014 to 2021, there were more than 500 lawyers who lost their license. 1,100 lawyers are urged to stop their practice. Among them, 13 lawyers are now involved in criminal proceeding because of their activities. These 13 lawyers, they violate the law. Currently, 9 of them are already finished their sentence or waiting for the sentence. Another 4 are still waiting for the verdict for the verdiction. As you mentioned, other types of punishment to lawyers. Now we don't have these cases so far. Compared to the 600,000 lawyers, the lawyers under punishment are only a small, tiny portion. The punishments are mostly administrative punishment. And meanwhile, our law contains a complete protection system for lawyers. For example, if a lawyer knows he or she is about to get punished, this lawyer has the right to participate in the hearing and defend his or her own right. After the punishment, the lawyer could apply for appeal to the higher level of government. Also, they could file a case to the People's Court. When coming to the criminal cases, during the whole proceeding, lawyer will have another lawyer with them. As for human rights defenders, I know there were NGOs who have made contributions to the promotion of the covenant rights. Individual organizations violate the law and are punished, but this has nothing to do with whether or not there's human rights organizations. You also mentioned the space for civil societies. Freedom of expression is guaranteed in the Constitution. Citizens could express their views through newspapers and other traditional media. In this new era, people can express their views online. For civil codes, we in the amendment of civil codes, we have published 10 times for public consultation, and we received more than 1 million opinions from the public, including many issues such as same-sex marriage issues. So in this manner, the freedom of expression is fully guaranteed. The Constitution also stipulates that all citizens, when exercise their rights, they shall not jeopardize the security of states or the rights and freedoms of other people. China's law also have liabilities on the violation of other people's rights, such as misinformation or incitement to subversion of state power. You have also mentioned laws in the field of anti-discrimination. From what I know, in China's legislation, we have different laws, such as the Civil Code, anti-domestic violence law, and other different types of laws. They all demonstrate the spirit of the covenant. We also have many cases of such as labor disputes, and all these cases are well dealt with. Thank you very much. I hope everyone can answer in a concise manner to save time. The next question is about trade union, as well as the reservation of the Article 8.1. I invite the colleague from the Social Security Department to answer the question. Thank you. I thank the members for your attention to China's trade union. First of all, China's constitution and other laws fully guarantee people's right to assembly. The constitution stipulates that Chinese people have the right and the freedom of expression, assembly, association, demonstration, and so on. Trade union is a group organized by workers. The enterprises and institutions, public organs within China the workers in these organizations, regardless of their age, education background, or religion, everyone has the right to participate or organize trade union. Any organization or individual should not impede such activity. You mentioned the reservation in Article 8.1 of the Covenant. Every country, when ratifying the covenant, shall declare reservation in line with their own context. This is a common practice around the world. China has labor law and other laws which already fully guarantee the right to assembly. However, we need to point out that the workers and the workers' organizations must also comply with countries' regulations and laws, especially in the field of social order. Under this context, everyone, every organization can exercise their rights lawfully. In view of all these, the reservation we have shows that China will continue to practically guarantee everyone's right to participate and organize trade union in line with our own context. Thank you for your response. The member has also mentioned the human rights defenders in Mongolia, Tibet, and Xinjiang. I would like to ask other colleagues to add on information in that regard. My colleague from Supreme Court has mentioned the lawyers' issues. In ethnic minority areas, the lawyers are there to protect the covenant rights. In Mongolia, we have increasing number of lawyers. Last year, in 2022, the number of lawyers increased compared to the previous year by more than 1,000 lawyers. The lawyers play a very big role in local areas. The lawyers who violate the law violate the professional ethics. I don't think they should be named as human rights lawyers. That's what I want to say. Also, you mentioned the discrimination in the household registration system. I would like to invite Department of Public Security to do response. I thank you for your attention on this issue. Since 2014, China has been promoting the reform in household registration system, including the measures like one, in registration, we abandoned the distinguishing between urban registration and rural registration. Then in the perspective of transfer, we respect all citizens' own will of choosing the residence, and they can flexibly transfer except for Beijing, Shanghai, and other major cities. Most cities already allow migrant workers to transfer the registration to local government. Now, 121 million rural registration households has transferred the registration to urban areas. And these people can enjoy equal rights as the urban residents, including education, healthcare, employment. So there is no discrimination to the rural household registrations. Thank you. You also mentioned some measures of anti-pandemic measures. I thank the member for your attention to China's anti-pandemic efforts. Since the outbreak, China always, in a transparent, open, and responsible manner, share all information and data with the international community. So far, we have over 200 press release and issued more than 100 documents to publish the activities carried out under the pandemic control. This also includes the information shared on GSAT, as well as our share within international community, the genome sequence of the virus. China has also maintained a close contact with WHO and international community in this regard, and has organized over 60 technical exchange meetings. Within the past month, we had 5 exchanges with WHO. WHO has expressed repeatedly that the technical exchange with China is very excellent and has very positive role. The information and data provided by China will help all countries to know the involvement of the virus and to well understand China's activities and policy. In this January, we had another talk with WHO to exchange views on the anti-pandemic activities. Both agree that we should continue to strengthen the technical exchange and cooperation. China always maintain an open channel to communicate with the international community. According to China's law, China's CDC website continues to publish our information and the number of cases. So all members could see from our website to know the real-time information on our pandemic control and number of cases. I would say some public information may not be mentioned in order to save time.
Chinese citizens have equal access to all the rights guaranteed by the Constitution and the law. And our existing law does not contain the concept of LGBT in movies and other cultural products. We won't have a phenomenon in which a citizen, because of his sexual orientation, will be treated differently. For instance, there is a transgender actor or actress called Jin Xin in China who appears frequently in Chinese TV and movie. The civil code and the law on marriages have made it that the man-woman forms a basic unit of the family. This is entirely in keeping with our traditional culture and the prevailing circumstances of the country. It is also similar to the similar legislations in other parts of the world. I thank you. Since we have so many questions and we have a time constraint, it's not possible for us to answer all the questions in detail. We'll give you more materials afterwards. Another connected question is about the equality of women in employment and the provision on anti-harassment treatment. On this issue, I'd like to ask my colleague on Commission on Women and Children's Affairs to give a reply. Regarding sexual harassment, in our amended law on protecting the rights of women in Article 25, 77, and 78, we have made specific provisions. And this is actually one of the focus of the law. When it comes to our attention that there has been serious cases with sexual harassment, we will mete out punishment according to the law. Under our criminal law, we have criminal offenses as rape and indecent coercion. As for the participation of women in employment, to my understanding, according to the figures we have in China, among the active population, women make up 43.5%. In the internet enterprises, women make up about 45% of the total workforce. In order to prevent discrimination based on sex, we have amended the law on protecting the rights of women and children, in which we have several articles which are provided explicitly provisions to that effect. And our labor inspection also includes provisions to that effect. We have several cases in this field. I'd like to give you a figure. In the most recent election of the National People's Congress, at the county level, women make up 31% of the delegates. At the lower level, the township level, that figure is 32%, an increase of 3 or 4% compared with the last time. In Guangxi, women's representatives have reached 38%. In the Supreme People's Court or in General Court, women judges now make up about 46% of all the judges. I'll stop with this.
I thank the esteemed delegation of the People's Republic of China for the answers they have given on Cluster 1. Now I give back the floor to Mr. Michael Windfor, Vice Chair of the Committee and Rapporteur on the third periodic report of China, if he has any follow-up questions on the answers given. Mr. Windfor, you have the floor.
No, yeah, sorry. Thanks a lot for the precise answers you have given to really all of the questions. I have a question going back to, let's say, the budgets you are using for social security. As far as I see, the question would be, how do you judge about the availability of resources you are spending on economic, social, and cultural human rights? That would be very interesting for all three parts. We know that you have increased it a lot and that you are spending a lot of activities, even income grants, as you have mentioned. But in Hong Kong, at least the figures say you are spending 30% of the GDP for social welfare. Maybe you can give us more active data on this. Thanks a lot for this. I would resume not having more questions because of the time and not to build on, let's say, the other clusters experts coming later. Yeah, so maybe I stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Windfor. I give the floor to the esteemed delegation. Mr. Windfor wishes to stop here.
Okay.
Thank you.
感谢你的追加的提问。关于社会保。
Well, regarding the budget of Social Security, I'd now like to give the floor to my colleague from the Ministry of Civil Affairs. Thank you very much indeed. A small correction regarding the budget of Social Security. I come from the Social Security Department of the Ministry of Human Resources. Regarding the deployment of our Social Security system, we try to ensure equality of the system and also its sustainability. On the latter part, we have taken a lot of measures. Firstly, we try to have more payments going to various accounts under the Social Security, that is to ask enterprises to pay more. In addition, the Social Security fund has been set up. Most of the resources come from the central government coffer, mostly devoted to supplementing resources for old age pension. Now we have about 2.6 trillion yuan in the old age pension. We are also seeking more resources from the social sectors. We have a system in which major enterprises nationwide will pay a unified rate as contribution. That is for state enterprises, that'll be 10%. And it'll be devoted exclusively to problems regarding the shortages in the insurance at the enterprise level. We will have also investment made in this field so as to ensure more resources. By the end of last year, all the provinces in China have started this entrustment system of investment, and the total amount involved is 1.5 trillion yuan. I hope through this presentation, you can see the efforts we're undertaking in this field. I thank you.
谢谢你做的介绍。
I thank you for your presentation. Do we have any comments from the Hong Kong and Macau colleagues?
For the question. The Hong Kong SAR government is committed to earnestly addressing people's concerns and difficulties in daily life and building a compassionate and inclusive society through a sustainable welfare system. Over the past decade, the government has sustained efforts in improving social welfare and introducing new measures on social security, elderly services, rehabilitation services, childcare, family support, and youth support. Specifically, the estimated recurrent government expenditure in the 22-23 financial year has reached over $14 billion, accounting for a record high of almost 20% of the total government recurrent expenditure, which is only second to our spending on healthcare services. This represents a significant jump of 1.6 times within a decade when compared to the 12-13 financial year. As one of the pillars of Hong Kong's retirement protection system, the Hong Kong SAR government implements a non-contributory, multi-tiered social security system to provide suitable assistance for people with different needs. The current system comprises the Comprehensive Social Security Assistance Scheme and Social Security Allowance Scheme. Separately, the Working Family Allowance Scheme provides support to lower-income working households in full-time employment who are not on CSSA. The government has substantially enhanced the above cash assistance schemes in recent years. The estimated total recurrent expenditure in the 22-23 financial year exceeds $9 billion, an increase of over 60% as compared to that 5 years ago, and almost 1.5 times that of 10 years ago. Thank you.
I thank the esteemed delegation of the People's Republic of China for the answers they've given. For follow-up questions on Cluster 1. Now we move in time to Cluster 2. Ms. Saran, you have a question?
Question on Cluster 1. Would you rather take Cluster 2 questions first? You can take that, and then I can come back whenever you give me the floor for a follow-up question.
If it is a short question, please pose it, and
Yeah,
then we
of
leave
course.
it to the delegation's discretion to reply when. You have the floor for a short question.
It's on. Thank you, Chair. And I have several follow-up questions, but maybe I'll raise those subsequently because these are cross-cutting issues. But specifically on the question of international cooperation, and thank you for the response provided by Your Excellency, as well as the other members of the delegation on the Belt Road Initiative. My specific question was that two major beneficiaries of China are today facing a major economic, financial, and balance of payments crisis. And I mean Pakistan and Sri Lanka. And this has led to serious internal turmoil and political instability within those countries. My question is, what responsibility does China take in helping these countries? More importantly, what steps and internal reviews is China undertaking to review its processes of providing debt as part of its Belt Road and development assistance cooperation. Then, of course, there have been, and it was touched upon very briefly by our rapporteur, on the allegations of Chinese overseas assistance and development being subjected to widespread environmental degradation, indebtedness, unsustainable credit terms, political coercion, corruption, and unsustainable white elephant projects that are not commercially viable, but meant to promote Chinese strategic interests rather than to benefit the local communities. I can give you specific examples. For example, in Kenya, they've taken the court to their Supreme Court, one of the BRI projects. There is one in Bangladesh where free prior informed consent was not taken. Another one in Indonesia, 2 projects in Philippines, one in Nigeria, and the list goes on. So also on free prior informed consent, whether domestically, for example, in dam building activities or major infrastructure projects that are being undertaken in the Tibetan Autonomous Region, whether the indigenous community is being consulted and their approval taken while undertaking such projects. And in that context, I know that the state party had supported the declaration, the UN Declaration on Rights to Indigenous People in 2007. So what is the government doing to disseminate this particular UN DRIP and to educate policymakers and business actors about its contents and the requirements of free prior informed consent of the indigenous people? Excellency, Mr. Chairman, I had other questions, but I'll maybe come back to them whenever time permits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ran. Maybe the delegation wishes to respond after we tackle cluster 2. You will have time to respond to these important questions posed by Mr. Ran. So now again, is it follow-up?
Yes, maybe given the time management, you might wish to take follow-up questions later. I thought Mr. Aslan, Ms. Lee asked for the floor.
Or any other follow-ups? So
yes, I think so, but you respond later after cluster 2. Okay. So just one follow-up question. It is
Ms. Lee.
Ms. Lee, please. Brief question. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, the distinguished delegation from the People's Republic of China. In order to complement the country rapporteur and other colleagues, I would like to ask a follow-up question. First, I would like to highlight inequality in income, wealth, and employment. It is commendable that many people are lifted out of poverty in China. However, as the delegation stated in the opening remarks, income distribution is one of the major concerns in China. In this regard, I would like to ask the government of China to provide the levels of income inequality before and after taxes and transfers, and levels of wealth inequality, which was initially on the list of issues regarding maximum available resources, paragraph 10. It is closely related to sustainable development goals, which China is committed to achieve, especially SDG 10. I would also like to ask the government to provide the statistics disaggregated by sex, ethnic origin, urban, rural population on the employment, unemployment, and underemployment rates, incomes, and the ratio of persons living in poverty, which was also on the list of the issues. This aggregated data is crucial because the state party can identify the disparity and gaps in ensuring the equal enjoyment of all economic, social, and cultural rights, not the least the right to work, the right to social security, the right to an adequate standard of living based on Article 2.2, non-discrimination and equality. Thank you very much.
I thank Ms. Lee for the question. Now, colleagues, you might think of follow-up questions, but and pose them after we finish with cluster 2, and then we can arrange later the replies with the delegation. Let's move now to cluster 2. Cluster 2, that is Articles 6 to 9, the right to work, the right to favorable conditions of work, the right to form trade unions, and right to social security, including social insurance. The cluster leader is Mr. Ludwig Hennebel. Mr. Hennebel, you have the floor.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président, de me donner la parole.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Chairman. I also take the opportunity to welcome the members of the delegation to Palais Wilson for this constructive dialogue on the International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights. We should once more emphasize our thanks to civil society and human rights defenders who provided information and who play a leading role in protecting human rights and social justice in often challenging contexts. And we welcome the fact that China is a party to the covenant and invite it to ratify the optional protocol, which would give access to an individual protection mechanism for the many people under its jurisdiction. This type of dialogue seeks to be constructive, aiming to provide the state party, civil society, and the United Nations, as well as the committee experts, with an opportunity to work together to make progress on human rights. It is not simply a matter of patting oneself on the back for progress or listing the articles of law which protect rights or denying or excusing allegations of violations, but identifying challenges, structural problems, and obstacles in order to find solutions together. That needs to be our starting point for this dialogue, which is not limited to 2 days of meetings in the Palais Wilson. It needs to be ongoing, open, and it needs to last over time. I would like to come back to 2 preliminary comments, echoing what my colleague mentioned during the introduction. On the one hand, there can be no constructive dialogue without free, informed participation by civil society, human rights defenders, and independent journalists. Credible, serious information leads us to issue concerns as regards the fear, the threats, and risk of reprisals felt by certain members of civil society. And reprisals are a major concern for our committee. We are attentive to that and call on China to make every effort to prevent reprisals and invite it to the government of China, I say, to confirm that it is ready to work with the United Nations bodies fully to prevent the risk of reprisals. Another preliminary comment is on lawyers and human rights defenders. And here again, we have very credible information on pressure and threats against human rights defender lawyers, especially working on social justice and economic, social, and cultural rights. They have been subject to this pressure, and we would like to know what steps are being taken by the government to free those who have been arrested or prosecuted because of their work for social justice. I continue now within this dialogue, calling on members of the committee to address items 6 to 9 of the Covenant on the right to work, the right to enjoy fair working conditions, the freedom of trade unions, the right to strike, and the right to social security. On Article 6, I start by forced labour. The largest violation of the right to work is forced labor, and minorities such as Tibetans, Uyghurs, and Muslims have according to our information, been forced into labor. Re-education through work has led to them being placed in internment camps, detention centers, prisons, political education camps, where they're exploited. And generally, it means that they are populations are forced to move, particularly Uyghurs and Tibetans. That is broadly documented. What are the specific measures taken by the state to end these practices, facilitate access to justice for victims, and provide them with reparation measures? On the same subject, what measures are being taken by the state to implement an autonomous, independent inspection mechanism for the training centers in the autonomous regions of Tibet and Xinjiang? Can you give information on precise, data-specific, statistical data broken down by ethnicity and gender on the number and proportion of people sent to professional training centers, and for how long? Do these people have the opportunity to receive support from their family, and if so, what? What measures are being taken to address cases of forced labor involved in alternation programs, particularly in textiles and clothing, and to protect the rights of students participating in these programs? What are the commitments of your government to authorize access to independent experts, including the special rapporteurs of the United Nations, to these territories, and particularly to the internment camps in Xinjiang province? Why has access been refused, or is generally refused, or is so difficult to obtain? Can the government commit to cooperating fully with the United Nations independent experts in order to bring these practices to an end? What measures are taken by the state party to implement Convention 29 and Convention 105 on the abolition of forced labor? These are ILO conventions, or ratified another one, another ILO convention on forced labor, as agreed in the Global Agreement on Investment between China and the EU, signed in 2020, on labor and discrimination. Now, how can you guarantee respect for the religious beliefs in the workplace, especially for Tibetans? What measures are being taken effectively to prohibit discrimination by public and private employers of people belonging to ethnic minorities? What are the consequences of the social credit system on employment possibilities? Does the state maintain infection control within employment and recruitment procedures? What measures are taken by the state to strengthen the effective legal protection of expatriate workers who, it appears, do not have their own legal status? Another question on categories of workers. What specific measures are being taken to guarantee the rights and interests of migrant workers and their protection from outsourcing? What specific measures have been taken to allow women to have equal access to posts in the civil service? And if you could come back to that, please, to give further details, and specifically to combat ending of employment during pregnancy, following a birth, or during breastfeeding, when women lose their posts, and what are the measures being taken to facilitate access for young people, including those with degrees? Moving to Hong Kong, under this article, what measures are being taken to protect the right to work and combat discrimination in the workplace of domestic workers, on the one hand, young people, on the other hand, and also LGBTIQ+ persons? What measures taken in Hong Kong to combat modern slavery and trafficking? Regarding the impossibility for, or the difficulties in access for certain journalists fully to carry out their profession, what measures are being taken to end the legal persecution of journalists and independent media, which radically undermines their right to exercise their profession, as seen, for example, in the prosecution against Mr. Lai, who is a flagship case of this major problem, but there are very many cases that have been reported, and they also refer to human rights defenders, intellectuals, trade unionists, and others. On Article 7, security, safety, and health in the workplace, what measures are being taken to guarantee respect for health and safety in the workplace in Chinese companies abroad, and guaranteeing that workplace conditions are in line with the covenant? What measures are being taken to improve working conditions, including from the health and safety point of view, particularly in factories? What mechanisms are being implemented, particularly in terms of access to justice for workers whose rights have been violated en masse during the zero COVID policy, according to certain allegations? What tangible measures have arisen from the National Plan for Prevention and Control of Vocational Disease 2021 to 2025 and the first statistical data? Will the plan be applied identically throughout China, including in the autonomous regions of Tibet and Xinjiang? Migrant workers still seeing a backlog in salary payments? What measures is the state adopting to uphold the rights and interests of domestic workers, Chinese workers seconded abroad, and medical staff? In Hong Kong, what measures are being taken to regulate working hours, raise the minimum salary, and provide acceptable conditions to domestic workers and migrant workers? In Macau, what regulatory tools are used effectively to prohibit discriminatory practice in the workplace? Under Article 8, on China, first of all, and you have partially replied, but perhaps you could give more details. What measures are being taken effectively to guarantee freedom of assembly and protect workers who want to set up a trade union or exercise trade union rights against threats of dismissal and intimidation, and favor the organization of trade unions outside of the Chinese Trade Union Federation? What measures are being taken to protect against arbitrary arrest and ill treatment of trade unions and others? What are the commitments of the government in this respect? What measures are being taken to ensure effective exercise of effective management of workplace accidents? In Hong Kong, what measures have been taken to protect academic freedom of staff and students in higher education against political pressure? What measures are being taken to repeal the law on national security incompatible with human rights and the rule of law? And what are the remedies in connection with this law on national security? In Macau, are there any limitations on trade union freedom and the right to strike in your legislation? And if so, how do they apply? And on Article 9, on social insurance and broadening of social coverage, certain questions have already been addressed. I would like to have more details there as well on the measures taken by China on social insurance and social coverage. If you could explain, please, the low proportion of people in the pension insurance system and describe the measures taken to ensure that everybody who is admissible receives their pension and it allows a decent life. What measures are being adopted by China to amend the law and have the same retirement age for men and women? What measures is the state taking to eliminate the threshold for participation for social insurance so that all types of workers can have equitable personal obligations and social security? Furthermore, could you please come back to your commitments in line with the previous recommendations by the committee to step up efforts to broaden social security coverage, particularly for ethnic minorities, rural dwellers, migrant workers, and those working in the informal sector? What measures are being taken to guarantee effective payment of pensions, ensure that pensions allow a decent living standard, guarantee the financial viability of the social security system, and broaden the coverage of social security, particularly for migrant workers and those working in the informal sector? On Hong Kong, what tangible measures are being taken to reform the social security system in order to set up a system that makes it possible to reduce inequalities, economic inequalities further? And in Macau, what measures are being put in place to ensure social coverage for persons with disabilities and particular disability that prevents them from working? Thank you very much, Chairman, for giving me the floor, and I thank the delegation once more for its commitment to this constructive dialogue.
I thank Mr. Hennebel for the questions he posed. And now the floor is to the delegation to give the answers. Delegation, you have the floor. 300 seconds, and you have it. Colleagues, we spend more than 5 minutes now. So the vice chair is correcting me, saying it's 500 seconds. So we are not going to add this on the meeting time. So now I give the floor to the delegation to give the answers to questions posed by Mr. Hennepel on Cluster 2. Delegation, you have the floor.
谢谢主席。
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. If possible, maybe we can start from the follow-up questions in Cluster 1. In the follow-up questions of Cluster 1, some questions are mentioned, such as the Belt and Road Initiative concerning Pakistan, Sri Lanka, including the debt burden. It also involves the environmental problem, corruption, and so-called coercive diplomacy. Also, it concerns the working condition of Chinese enterprises in other countries. So I would like to give the floor to a colleague from Foreign Ministry to answer these questions. I thank Madam Sarong for your questions. The Belt and Road Initiative aims to promote the quality growth and sustainable development of the countries on the route. When we implementing the initiative with our partners, we also provide lots of opportunities for them. In the long term, this will help to deal with the deficit and lessen the debt burden. After the COVID pandemic, many countries have higher debt. In China, we have lots of efforts to deal with the debt issue. We actively implement the G20 initiative on debt relief, and we're the country with the greatest contribution to this initiative. In August 2020, we already announced 17 African countries have already been exempted from the 23 debts. China will also promote the multilateral organization and debtor and creditor and other multi-holders to participate in the initiative. As regards to what you mentioned, the debt in Sri Lanka and Pakistan, I should say this problem is not caused by China. China is a friend to Sri Lanka and Pakistan, and within our capacity, we have been providing assistance to their development. After the debt issue in Sri Lanka, China has proactively initiated that we suspended the debt. We carried out the debt suspension with Sri Lanka. This fully shows China's commitment to and our sincerity in achieving the debt sustainability in Sri Lanka. We also hope other creditors will follow suit by taking similar measures. We have also noticed the difficulties in Sri Lanka, and China supports Sri Lanka taking different measures to deal with this issue. Chinese enterprises, when doing investment overseas, the priority is carrying out the feasibility study and due diligence. In the operating, enterprises give high attention to environmental protection and sustainable development. regarding the project in Kenya, we would do further study on this case. I have an example for you. In Peru, we have a project. Before opening this project, our enterprise has done a thorough feasibility study, including the survey on the environment and economic conditions. We helped to design a water treatment system which helped to solve the water quality problem. Also, we helped build some modern facilities such as theaters and museums to enhance the happiness of local people. In the Kenya railway project, before this project, we also conducted an assessment on environmental assessment before this project. We have adopted effective measures to protect the local wildlife, and all these efforts have been widely welcomed by local people. All this show that China attaches importance to social responsibility, environmental protection, and the cohesion with local area in operating our projects, and we will make further efforts in this regard. Thank you for your response. Another member, Madam Li, mentioned the inequality in income and employment. She also mentioned about disaggregated data in this regard. I give the floor to Human Resources and Social Security Ministry to respond. I thank Madam Li's question on the inequality issue. The inequality in workplace is a commonly seen problem around the world. In China, we give high importance to the inequality issue, and we commit ourselves to helping the vulnerable groups in the workplace, in the work market, in the employment market, such as the migrant worker. We integrate urban-rural areas together and guarantee the migrant workers' income and entrepreneurship. We establish an equal system for both rural and urban workers, and we support the migrant workers to return to their home locality to establish a business. For the groups with difficulties, we provide assistance to help them with employment. We do not have any discrimination against any group in the working market. Now we already have a flexible system to ensure everyone have access to the insurance. The unemployment insurance is open to everyone. Regarding the work-related injury insurance, we give specific attention to construction sector, and the migrant workers are now included in the insurance. Also, in construction area, migrant workers are now included in protection system. Regarding the salaries, China has our own system of minimum wage. The minimum wage regulation is to protect the employee and his family's living standard. It gives consideration to the cost of living and the employees' contribution to the social insurance, the employees' salary, as well as other factors. On this basis, we further improve the assessment and adjustment of the minimum wage. We have a system of periodic adjustment of the minimum wage. By 2020, the growth of minimum wage is 4% every year. Regarding the data, the data is mainly about the urban area, rural area, and the groups with difficulties. Each country, in line with its actual context, that has different disaggregated data to collect. I would like to hear your recommendations in this regard. And after this meeting, we will further study your recommendations and respond. And now let's come into the class 2 questions. Mr. Hannibal come up with a number of questions. First of all, I invite my colleagues to respond to questions regarding the independent journalists. I thank Mr. Hannibal for your question. The journalists in China, their right to carry out lawful reports coverage, such right is fully guaranteed in the law. In China, now we have hundreds of millions of blogs or mini media. As long as they are in line with the law, then they can fully exercise the freedom of expression. However, the editors or journalists, if they do journalism with payment, or if they do any fraud or blackmailing in their work, they must be punished. Regarding the lawyers and humorous defenders in workplace, I give the floor to Supreme Court. I thank Mr. Hannibal for your questions. Regarding the practice of lawyers, we have legislation to protect the lawyers' rights and interests. For example, the defense opinions in the court, except for those that interrupt the interest of country, all opinions are, the freedom of expressing the opinion is fully protected. Also, we have special protections for lawyers to practice their activities. The Supreme Court, the judicial system, and the Public Security Department jointly establish a relief channel and protection for lawyers to protect the right to carry out their professional practice. Also, we issued a number of legal instruments to guarantee the right of litigations. For example, all these departments on the website and in the workplace must publish the information of the agencies, organizations, and the contacts that the lawyers could contact to file the complaints. And if any violation is discovered, relevant authorities or officers must come for intervention. Also, we establish a platform for lawyers to file complaints. Also, I'd like to stress that China's judicial system is open and transparent. From register to proceeding to the final decision, we have a platform for all these procedures in transparency. As long as these instruments do not contain any confidential information, they can be they are accessible online. All these.
Now regarding the question on social protection, social security of women and the working conditions for women, I'd like to ask my colleague to give a reply.
中国的宪法
China's constitution and the law on labor contracts all guarantee the equality of women in employment and in social security. Chinese law on social security has a special system on maternity protection so as to ensure that women during the period of giving birth to a child can receive wages and benefits. Women employees during pregnancy and during maternity leave will keep their relationship with the employer and will even enjoy special protections under the new law on protecting women's rights and interests. The protection period has been prolonged starting from the moment or a case in which if the contract has come to an end during the pregnancy, the contract can be extended. We have also noticed that in some places, the employment hiring process of some enterprises have placed some restrictions on the employment of women. Therefore, in 2021, the Supreme People's Court and the All China Women's Federation have issued a document in which the Procuratorate Department will be involved. And this has been made explicit into the new law on protecting women's rights and interests. All the cases in which we are aware of have been corrected. During the past decade, the employment of women have grown by nearly 40%.
好，谢谢你的回答。
I thank you for your answer. And now we come back to the questions raised earlier regarding enforced labor, the ratification of the conventions, the protection of migrant workers, freedom of association and free trade unions, as well as the level of social protection, social security, the coverage, the same retirement age for men and women, the employees in the informal sector, including the rural migrant workers. For those questions, I'd like to give the floor to my colleague from the Ministry of Human Resources.
谢谢。
Thank you. Firstly, in response to the question of China's intention to ratify 2 ILO conventions, on the whole, when it comes to ratifying and implementing ILO conventions, we have adopted a very serious attitude. The 2 conventions on enforced labor form part of the key human rights documents of ILO. They're also very important international legal instruments. In 2022, the National People's Congress decided to adopt or to ratify those 2 conventions. We have then followed by giving our letters of ratification to ILO. That means China has always taken a firm stand against forced labor, and we are committed to protecting the rights of workers and are firmly against forced labor. In accordance with the provision of the convention and the regulations of the ILO, we have been submitting implementation reports as a sign of seriousness and responsibility as a major country. Also, at the local level, we have started education campaigns and training sessions in order to ensure that the whole society can have a better understanding against forced labor. We're also willing to work with the international community in order to advance the cause of protection against forced labor. Regarding the second question, that is the protection of the rights of rural migrant workers and the free association, the protection of workers' rights. In fact, I've covered those issues during my previous replies. I can also use this occasion to add something so that you can have a better understanding of what China has been doing under the current system of trade unions, especially in protecting the rights of workers. Firstly, the legislation is underway. We have amended the law on trade unions, which has made it clear that workers in new sectors of economy have the right to form trade unions. On that basis, just now you mentioned that the All China's Federation of Trade Unions has also taken many measures to ensure the rights of people engaged in digital economy. It has set up mechanisms for consultations and to provide better service to people in those sectors and to provide help in their daily work and daily life. At the same time, trade unions are also involved in drafting relevant laws, including the field of trade union and the prevention of occupational diseases. Thus, they have given expression to the aspirations of the workers they represent, and most of their suggestions have been adopted. At the same time, the trade unions are also monitoring the implementation of the laws in this field by strengthening their capacity to protect the rights of the workers. By the end of 2021, trade unions in China have set up 72,000 organizations of this type. That was about the problem regarding to the protection of workers' rights by trade unions. There is another question concerning the level of social protection. Just now, when I gave an answer to the protection of vulnerable groups in labor market, I actually covered some of the ground. But now I can make another comment in this field. The level and coverage of social protection has always been a focus of our efforts to build up a social security system. The Chinese government has been pushing forward the full coverage of all workers into the scheme by speeding up a system which is accessible and fair to all workers. Just now you mentioned that the old age pension system doesn't have a very high coverage, but to our understanding, by the end of last year, the coverage has reached 1.5 billion people. And 5.5 million people have become members. In fact, our achievement in this field have been highly recognized by international community, including by the ILO. Secondly, concerning the old age pension system in rural and urban areas, just now I said that in setting up the new rural old age pension system and the urban old age pension system, we're trying to unify the two systems. And I just now explained that 550 million people are covered by this. And in this process, we're also trying to adopt new policies to raise the coverage of migrant workers. Now, more and more migrant workers have been adopted into the system as city workers. We have unified the subsidy level for both types of workers, and the rural migrant workers have seen their benefits greatly increased. If a rural migrant worker loses his job, he can get 2,800 yuan as insurance. And the insurance contribution is 410 yuan. In the field of enterprise insurance, we have also started to carry out some pilot projects in this field. By the end of 2022, the work-related injury scheme has covered people in the informal sector and the new forms of employment, including those food couriers. They are also included into the protection system of work-related injury. That was about the protection of Social Security and the coverage. Now I come to the question of retirement. My government attaches great importance to postponing the legal retirement age. Just now you asked the timetable for unifying the retirement age for men and women. I can't give you a definite answer at this stage, but I can say that in light of the provisions of the 14th five-year plan, we are raising the retirement age as a basic principle. We are making incremental changes and emphasize on flexible and staged implementation. That is, we will gradually raise the legal retirement age. The purpose of this policy is made in light of the overall economic and social development. It is also a major measure to deal with the aging population, to make the best use of human resources and encourage the coordinated economic and social development. We're also drafting specific reform measures, so the gradual incrementation of retirement age will be implemented. Now, there is another question on occupational disease. Just now there was a question on occupational disease and the wage arrears of migrant workers and the insurance for Chinese workers working abroad. I'll be brief. Regarding occupational disease, in fact, my country attaches great importance to this issue. We have also issued a lot of measures, especially focusing on the prevention of occupational diseases in major enterprises, including specific remedy measures. As to the wage arrears of migrant workers, we have been making more and more investment into addressing this problem by means of labor inspection and other measures. We have made this issue a focus of our attention. As to overseas workers, whether they have the similar protection, we have signed many bilateral agreements on social protection with other countries for the purpose of protecting Chinese overseas workers and those foreign workers who come to China, so that they will have their social insurance and social protection, which will be similar to what they enjoy in their home countries. I thank you. I thank my colleagues for their answer. I must remind you again, you should be as brief as possible. so that more colleagues from other departments can be involved. The next question concerns the minority groups, especially in Tibet and Xinjiang, including the working conditions, whether there is forced labor, and also questions regarding the vocational educational center. And now give the floor to the colleague from the Ministry of United Front.
感谢 Hannibal 先生。
Thank you, Mr. Hannibal, for your concern of the labor rights of minorities. As for the question of forced labor in Tibet, to my understanding, there is no such a issue in reality. Over the years, the central government has been working hard to ensure the employment of Tibetans. They have never encountered discrimination, and on the contrary, they benefit from special policy allowances. Firstly, those special policies include special trainings for Tibetans. In China, several dozen universities are training Tibetan technicians. In the Renmin University and Hunan University, every year there are special training courses and postgraduate courses aiming at Tibetans. Secondly, the government has also requested all the central government departments and the state enterprises to give certain posts every year for trainees from Tibet. In fact, more than 10,000 posts of this type have been provided. And every year, we have a special recruitment of civil servants for those coming from Tibet. Thirdly, we are also asking relevant provinces and departments to formulate policies to ensure employment in Tibet. In Shanghai, for instance, those enterprises which recruit Tibetans can receive special benefits. In Jilin province, Tibetan workers have extended holidays. In addition, those major construction projects try to recruit as much as possible Tibetans. As for the working conditions of the Tibetans, compared with other ethnic groups, they have the same treatment. Tibetans can have the same pay for the same work. There is no problem in the field. Thank you. Well, there was a question concerning Xinjiang, the vocational training center, and so on and so forth. Could you please also give a reply to this? Firstly, I'd like to thank Mr. Hannibal, for his concern of the labor issue in Xinjiang. Mr. Hannibal raised a lot of questions. I tried to limit my answer to two aspects. Firstly, concerning the vocational training center, and also, in general, the rights to employment of people in Xinjiang. Firstly, concerning the vocational training center, I must clarify it is not a place for detention, nor is it a place for forced labor. It is just a school to de-radicalize the trainees. It does not seek to hire workforce in a general sense. What it is trying to do is to educate those people who have taken part in terrorist activities, but the activities are quite minor and do not constitute crimes. Therefore, it's after receiving administrative punishment, those trainees can go to schools of this type to study national law and Chinese. And they can also pick up one or two labor skills. and receive de-radicalization education. I must emphasize that in those courses, the training is limited to lessons in class and practice. They will never take part in actual labor. By the end of 2019, all those training activities, all those students have finished their study. So the problem you mentioned doesn't exist now. As for the number of people involved in those educational centers, according to local law, the county government can set up this type of center in light of their local conditions. Some of the counties have started earlier and some have started later. Some of the training centers have been there for a longer time. The number of people involved is dynamic. During the actual training course, most of the students stay in schools. Of course, they can go home from time to time and ask for leave. They're also free to communicate with their family members. In fact, the family members can also come to school and visit.
他在里面学员享有他
concerning the prohibition of foreigners to go to these vocational training centers. These centers, because they are schools, they are subject to their own regulations. So be it Chinese or foreigners, when they enter these centers, they need permission from the school. If they want to visit the students, then the students themselves have to agree to it. So this has nothing to do with the nationality. In fact, my colleagues and I and other people who are generally interested in the affairs in Xinjiang before 2019, on many occasions, they went to visit a center and had exchange with the students here, of course, on condition these people agreed to do so. On many occasions, we, on condition that the students agreed to do so, we returned back to the graduates from these centers. Generally speaking, these graduates are happy with their life and study in the centers. Now, my second answer, that is in the general sense of employment. After graduation, these students are like other people in the society. They have the right to work. The Chinese government forbid forced labor. This is the case for all ethnic groups. On an equal and voluntary basis, they can sign labor contract with enterprises with the same condition, on condition that receive same pay, equal pay for same work. Enterprises has the obligation to respect the habits of these people. The government in Xinjiang does not have any compulsory regulation. It only provides job information or training opportunities. In the last few years, on average, about 2,000 workshops, online, offline, were organized. 500,000 employment opportunities were provided to applicants. Thank you. I would like to again remind you to be concise with your answer because we have a lot of people waiting to answer the questions. Now, give the floor to now. I would like to give the floor to the Commission on Religious Affairs. I would like to answer the question by Mr. Hannibal concerning freedom of religion in Tibet. China always has a policy of freedom of religion. Our constitution of law on ethnic minority, they all provide for the freedom of religion of the whole Chinese people. In Tibet, we have Tibetan Buddhism temples, more than 1,000. We have living Buddhas, more than 300. We also have 4 mosques with more than 10,000 native Muslims. We have cathedrals and more than 700 believers. Now, the religious activities in Tibet are operating in a normal way. According to Chinese law, all the religious activities are carried out in religious sites. As to believers, based on their own tradition, they can carry out religious activities at home, like praying. They are free to do so, and the government does not interfere in this kind of activity. Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Now we have questions concerning Hong Kong and Macau. I give the floor to the delegate from the 2 SARs.
Thank you. I would first like to respond to a question raised during Cluster 1 about Hong Kong's trade union rights. Hong Kong residents enjoy rights and freedom to form and join trade unions. Such rights and freedom are enshrined in the Basic Law and clearly protected under various local ordinances, including the Trade Unions Ordinance. Trade union rights in Hong Kong are strong and intact as ever. This is evidenced by the marked increase in the number of registered trade unions from 917 in 2019 to 1,454 in 2020, which was a 59% increase. We would also like to point out that among the 176 trade unions that were deregistered in 2021 and 2022, only 1 was deregistered by the Hong Kong SAR government, as its activities were inconsistent with the trade union's objects or rules. The rest of the 175 were deregistered following voluntary dissolution or cancellation initiated by the trade unions concerned. One must draw a clear difference between legitimate trade unions' activities protected under our law and unlawful acts that have nothing to do with the exercise of trade union rights. We would like to reiterate that the Hong Kong SAR government is dedicated to defend and protect the lawful rights and freedom of association in Hong Kong. I would now like to address the question about work conditions of foreign domestic workers working in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong SAR government appreciates the contribution of foreign domestic helpers in Hong Kong and is very committed to safeguarding their welfare. Hong Kong has all along been a very popular destination for foreign domestic helpers. Currently, about 340,000 foreign domestic helpers are working in Hong Kong, which in itself is testimony to the comprehensive protection that the HKSAR offers to them. Hong Kong is among the few jurisdictions in the world that offers statutory protection on par with those for local workers to foreign domestic helpers. Furthermore, they are given the additional benefits under a government-prescribed standard employment contract, including a minimum allowable wage, free accommodation, and free medical treatment given by their employers. Some of the benefits are not usually available to local workers. We would also encourage employers and helpers to agree on other work arrangements, including working hours, having regard to the needs and distinctive work patterns of individual households. The Hong Kong SAR government will continue to provide assistance to foreign domestic helpers working in Hong Kong. Thank you. I would now like to hand over to my colleague to take other questions.
Human trafficking and modern slavery is never tolerated in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong SAR government has been making proactive and multi-pronged efforts to combat trafficking in persons and to enhance the protection and well-being of foreign domestic helpers. Hong Kong has a well-established legislative framework with over 50 legal provisions against various TIP conducts. This forms a comprehensive package of safeguards comparable to those composite TIP laws in other jurisdictions. Some of the offences attract penalty of up to life imprisonment. The Hong Kong SAR government has set up a high-level steering committee in 2018 and promulgated an action plan with a comprehensive package of measures covering victim identification, protection and support, investigation, enforcement, prosecution and prevention, and partnership with different stakeholders. All the 34 initiatives in the action plan were fully implemented in 2019. In identifying TIP victims, the Hong Kong SAR government has all along been taking a proactive approach. A joint investigations team comprising the police, the customs, and the Labor Department has been formed to enhance intelligence exchange, identification of TIP victims, and joint investigation and cooperation to combat human trafficking. All vulnerable persons, including illegal immigrants, sex workers, illegal workers, foreign domestic helpers, and imported workers coming to the attention of this department will be screened for signs of TIP. A range of suitable protection and support services will be provided to these TIP victims so identified. I'll now pass the time to my colleague to respond to questions relating to national security law. Thank you.
As regards law enforcement actions involving journalists, it should be reiterated that any law enforcement actions taken by Hong Kong law enforcement agencies are based on evidence strictly according to the law for the acts of the persons or entities concerned and have nothing to do with their occupation. As for the specific case mentioned, as the legal proceedings are still ongoing, no one should, and it is inappropriate for any person to, comment on or even interfere with such cases, as it is a matter of sub judice. Whether the criminal charges are established will be decided by the judiciary of the HKSAR upon independent and fair adjudication. And finally, regarding the comment on repealing the Hong Kong national security law, we are still facing different national security threats. The continued implementation of the Hong Kong national security law and other laws safeguarding national security is essential in enabling us to ensure the continued stability and prosperity of Hong Kong. Thank you.
Because of time constraint, we can wait until the third cluster to answer the rest of the questions. Now I give the floor to the chair.
I thank the delegation for having given me the floor. And now, thank you for the answers you have given to Cluster 2. I suggest that now we move to Cluster 3, listen to questions by Mr. Ashraf Kunai on Cluster 3. That is the family, the right to adequate standard of living, and then the right to highest attainable standard of health. After these questions, which are supposed to be answered tomorrow by the esteemed delegation, we may see if we have time for a few follow-up questions to be posed in the few minutes remaining. So now, Mr. Kunai, cluster leader for Cluster 3, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Let me first extend a warm welcome to His Excellency and the distinguished Chinese delegation. We thank you also for the wealth of information which has already been communicated and which has received our careful consideration. I would not repeat what has already been stated by my two colleagues formerly. First, as regards the very valuable and important contribution made by NGOs who have a vital role to play in the whole exercise, and also with regard to the concerns that have been expressed in connection with reprisals. But I must hasten to add in that connection that we feel deeply comforted and appreciate the statement which has been made by Your Excellency to look into all these issues seriously and to come up with any solution which may be required in the circumstances. And I would briefly tell you how I propose to proceed in order to meet the tight timeline. I would start first with issues generally concerning China, before turning to 5 or 6 topics which are common to all 3 entities, and finally addressing a few issues concerning specific issues to Macau and Hong Kong. So first, under Article 10, we have been provided with detailed information by the state party in relation to the implementation of family planning policies in China, and there has been a strong denial of all the allegations of coercive measures used against ethnic minorities, particularly in the Xinjiang Uyghur region. We are, however, in presence of persistent reports supported by mass of evidence from several quarters, pointing towards the use of coercive measures such as forced sterilization and forced abortions of Uyghur women and ethnic Kazakh women. I shall briefly refer to some of the available information, which point to the coercive enforcement of family planning policies in the Xinjiang region since 2017. And we are particularly concerned with these regions, which consist of an Uyghur majority. In 2018, 80% of all net IUD, that is intrauterine device placements in China, were performed in the Uyghur region, although this region makes up only 1.8% of the Chinese population. 2, birth rates dropped significantly among Uyghur women in the 2 largest Uyghur prefectures. In Hotan, birth rate decreased from 20.9% in 2016 to 8.5% in 2018. And similarly, in Kashgar, it dropped from 18.1% in 2016 to 7.9% in 2018. It is also widely reported that coercive family planning policies were enforced by repressive measures, which include fines, referrals, and extrajudicial internments in vocational education training centers, where some inmates have been reportedly subjected to torture and sexual violence. There are also consistent complaints of intimidations, threats, and reprisals reported by former detainees or inmates and their relatives for speaking about their experiences. So my questions in that context will be as follows. 1, will you please provide us with the statistical data disaggregated by ethnicity and regions, including Hotan and Kashgar in particular, on the number of abortions and sterilizations carried out from 2016 to 2022. 2, please provide information as to why the use of IUDs amongst Uyghur women was substantially on the increase in 2018 in comparison with the rest of the Chinese population. Please explain the reasons for the marked decline in birth rates in the 2 largest Uyghur prefectures of Hotan and Kashgar from 2015 to 2018. 3, please provide detailed information as to the concrete measures in place for a transparent procedure to ensure that Uyghur women are not subjected without their prior and free informed consent to any form of sterilization or medical process. And what are the steps which have been taken to implement our committee's previous recommendations set out in paragraph 25 and 26 of its concluding observations in 2015, and which were meant to prevent and criminalize any form of coercive abortion or sterilization? And what are the measures in place or contemplated to ensure prompt and impartial investigation and prosecution of perpetrators of forced sterilization or abortion? Yes. Next, please provide statistical data disaggregated by age and sex of referrals of persons of ethnic or religious minorities who were sent to the vocational education and training centers in Xinjiang from 2017 to 2022. The next question would also, please provide statistical data disaggregated by age, sex, and region of the number of ethnic and religious, of the number of children of ethnic or religious minorities who have been separated from their families in order to be placed in boarding schools. Now, under Article 11, we note with great appreciation the immense progress made by China in the reduction of poverty. But we have the following questions under Article 11. Will you please provide information supported by statistical data showing the impact of the poverty alleviation policies and measures referred in the answers to question 23 in the list of issues with regard to the reduction of poverty in rural areas and in addressing the high rates of poverty affecting children of urban immigrants, workers who are still living in rural areas. 2, please indicate with supporting statistical data the progress achieved by the implementation of these measures, that is the poverty alleviation measures, in narrowing the wide gap and disparities between rural and urban areas, in particular with regard to income and wealth inequalities, adequate housing and living conditions, water and sanitation, and with regard to access to healthcare and education. Please also provide information as to the measures for eradication of poverty of the persons and families living below the poverty line, including in particular older persons, persons with disability, and the poorer persons living in rural areas. Now, what are the measures and policies in place to address the income and wealth inequalities between the richer and poorer segments of the population? And what are the steps being taken to narrow the gap and disparities between urban and rural areas as regards the right to adequate housing and living conditions and access to healthcare and education? What are the steps which have been taken to ensure the adequate housing and living conditions of the rural to urban migrants who have left their homes and families in rural areas in order to work in the urban areas? And what are the measures in place to ensure that the children of rural to urban migrants are not subjected to undue family separation and are not adversely affected in the enjoyment of the covenant rights as a result of the current house registration system, commonly referred to as the hukou system? As regards relocation and resettlement of residents, please provide information supported by statistical data disaggregated by region and ethnic origin as to the number of land expropriations carried out by the public authority, and please provide details of compensation paid to all those who have been thus dispossessed of their land. Now I shall turn to those questions which are common to all three entities, that is mainland China, as well as Hong Kong SAR and Macau SAR. First, with regard to the right to health, please provide detailed information supported by statistical data disaggregated by region as to the impact of the measures taken to address any shortcoming of the health system as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and please explain what has been done in that context to provide adequate health services, including in terms of capacity, availability of medical staff and equipment, and geographical distribution of services. Please also give information as to the measures taken and the impact to address the backlog of medical treatment and the delay due to the COVID-19 pandemic, in particular to ensure the right of adequate health services of the more disadvantaged and marginalized groups and individuals who have greater difficulty in accessing health services, such as children with disabilities, older persons, migrant workers, patients afflicted with mental conditions, and persons living in remote rural areas. And what are the measures in place to ensure that all these persons from disadvantaged groups do not have to bear the burden of any partial reimbursement for any type of medical care, including for critical illnesses and hospitalization expenses? Please provide detailed information supported by statistical data as to the progress achieved by the implementation of the measures for drug rehabilitation treatment and other measures in the provision of harm reduction services for drug users. And please provide statistical data and information as to the progress achieved in the implementation of the measures and policies for HIV/AIDS, more particularly with regard to patients who are provided with antiretroviral drugs. And also, please provide information supported by statistical data disaggregated by geographical regions with regard to the progress achieved in combating air, water, and soil pollution through the enforcement of the relevant legislation enacted for that purpose, as well as the number and outcome of the environmental public interest litigation cases lodged before the Chinese courts. Next, mental health. Please provide information as to measures taken within the mental health system in terms of availability and accessibility and affordability of services in order to respond to the increase in mental health care needs, more particularly in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And please explain what has been done to improve the quality and adequacy of services, both at preventive and curative levels, in particular for the more disadvantaged and marginalized groups, and what are the policies and measures in place to combat all forms of stigma with regard to persons suffering from mental health conditions, and in particular to tackle the problem of confinement and shackles imposed on persons with mental health conditions. Please provide information supported by statistical data disaggregated by age, sex, and region as regards the suicide rate over the past 5 years, and what are the measures and policies in place to prevent the recurrence of suicide. As regards gender recognition, please provide information as to the steps which have been taken. One, to provide legal recognition to gender change, and two, to adopt comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation explicitly prohibiting any form of discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics. Are there any steps contemplated towards the recognition of same-sex partnerships? I understand there has been some answer with regard to sub judice. It is a case pending, but our question has nothing to do with the court case. Our question relates to what is the policy of government with regard to adopting any measures for the legal recognition of same-sex couples. One, and more particularly, and that is the second part of it, for guaranteeing the equal and non-discriminatory enjoyment by same-sex couple and LGBTI persons of their economic and social and cultural rights, which would include not only the right to lawful marriage, but also the right of same-sex couples and families to non-discriminatory access to legal protection, health and medical care, housing, social security benefits, and all public services based on a recognition of their status. And please also provide information as to the measures in place within the health system to provide healthcare and medical services appropriate to transgender persons and for any gender affirmation surgery and transgender hormone therapy. And please explain the official public policy concerning migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. What are the steps taken to provide them with appropriate standard of living and with access to public medical services, to food and nutrition, adequate housing, and decent living conditions, and access to education for their children. Domestic violence, please provide statistical information disaggregated by region as to the number and nature of domestic violence cases which have been reported, investigated, and followed by prosecution and conviction. What are the policies in place to raise awareness by women of their rights and avenues for obtaining protection and redress? Please tell us what are the measures taken to ensure a thorough investigation of all domestic violence cases, as well as prosecution and conviction with appropriate sanctions for perpetrators of domestic violence. And what are the steps which have been taken to ensure that law enforcement agencies and the court's handling of domestic violence cases give due consideration to a gendered understanding of domestic violence during the legal processes? Human trafficking, please provide information as to the measures in place and the effectiveness thereof to ensure that cases of human trafficking are proactively investigated, prosecuted, and are met with effective, proportionate, and dissuasive sanctions. What steps have been taken to afford necessary protection and assistance to child victims, in particular the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and the separated children of migrants workers? I shall now turn to a few issues concerning Hong Kong. First, with regard to poverty, what are the steps which have been taken to eradicate and lift out of poverty that proportion of the population still living below the poverty line, and which include in particular persons with disability, low-income families, older persons, foreign and migrant workers, and children living in poverty? According to documented reports, Hong Kong has one of the most worst inequality rates among developed nations in terms of wealth and income. What are the measures and policies in place to address wealth and income inequalities in order to tackle its worsening wealth gap and in order to provide for a stronger and well-balanced welfare system for the poorer and more disadvantaged segment of its population? With regard to right to housing, please provide detailed information as to the measures taken to afford effective protection against the risk of homelessness and provide adequate and affordable housing, in particular to the poor and disadvantaged groups who cannot afford to own private property. What are the measures in place to afford effective legal protection for the security of tenure of tenants and to prevent an abusive imposition of exorbitant rental costs and utilities charges by landlords? And please provide information as to the steps taken and the effectiveness to ensure adequate and decent living conditions and legal protection for people currently living in substandard housing in Hong Kong. And as regard older persons in Hong Kong, please provide information as to the progress achieved in the implementation of the Elderly Services Program Plan, ESPP, and please explain how the program responds effectively to the implementation of the rights enshrined in the covenant, especially in view of the adverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the living conditions and access to healthcare and medical services. I understand time is up, so I would only summarize two questions for Macau. First, indicate the proportion of persons living below the poverty line, and please tell us about the measures which are in place and which are being contemplated to provide financial assistance to the poor and low-income groups, as well as the marginalized and disadvantaged groups, so that they are able to cater for their basic needs under the covenant rights. And what are the measures in place to monitor changes in income distribution so as to remove inequalities in wealth, to narrow the gap in inequalities in wealth, income and wealth between the richer and poorer segments of the population? And what are the steps that have been taken to ensure the enjoyment of covenant rights by non-resident workers, in particular with regard to housing, living conditions, and access to healthcare? And one last question, what measures and policies in place to guarantee the right to adequate housing without inordinate delay to the disadvantaged, vulnerable, and low-income groups of the population, and to what is referred to as the sandwich class groups, that is those people who are not entitled to subsidized housing and who cannot afford to pay the high cost of private housing? So I would stop here because the...
I thank Mr. Ashraf Kunai for the questions he posed. I thank the esteemed delegation of China for the answers they gave. I thank also all those from civil society and others who showed interest in this meeting, in this room and in other room as well. And I thank those from the United Nations who came to help us today. Thank you very much for your presence. And we'll meet tomorrow at 10 o'clock, which means that the delegation of China have 21 hours to answer to the questions and to prepare for tomorrow. The meeting is closed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, how many seconds?